So, as a research person, I might say that see there are a number of layers in the Bhagavad Puran. They deny and say no, Vyasa wrote it on so and so in 5000 BC. And how do you say that? Well, it is said. And when it is said, it is true. So I believe absolutely in the power of words. The power of word, which is there in our religious scriptures, help us to believe that whatever is there in the scriptures is nothing else but real, nothing else but history, and really existed. Some of us may be skeptical about it, and therefore we all people who look at it in a purely academic angle are seen as well, you don't understand the purport behind it. You have not understood the real meaning which is there. So that is the remark. For example, I like to tell you that when we read the Bhagavad Gita and you have the Bhagavad Gita chanting. Now after 2 days you have the Margashirsha month beginning, and in the month of Margashirsha you have the Gita Jayanti, and you see number of activities going on in that period. So it takes about say 6 to 7 hours to recite the entire Bhagavad Gita. So the question as a researcher, see we try to verify everything, we try to verify, test it based on science, test it based on logic, and is it possible for Arjun to sit in that particular position for 7 hours or in a standing position, and when the entire war is going on, what would have others done at that time? So that is the question, and therefore scholars will say that well that Gita might have been something in 17 or 18 verses, which in that way Krishna counseled Arjun and made him ready for the war. But if we try to project that, we said no, it's not possible. Those 700 words are something which is a dialogue between Krishna, Arjun, Sanjay, etc., and that is real. So this particular idea that they are historical facts. Parshuram existed, and it is Parshuram who made the entire Malabar coast. And that is the earliest example of land reclamation. Okay, yeah. So he shot an arrow in the ocean, and then the ocean had to move back, and then the entire Konkan and the Malabar, the Konkan, Goa, the western coast came into existence, and people believe that and agree that this is reality and that is history. So this is and that is early history. Maybe you cannot verify that because archaeology, because history has got its own limitations. Language is limitless, and you believe in the reality of the world over here. So that is the thing which is there. So at the same time, you have scholars like Strauss, who would say that myth is the grammar of the society, myth is the language of the society. The society speaks through the medium of mythology. So when you want to understand the society, you have to understand the mythology which is there behind that particular society. And that was what British did when they started the branch of Indological studies. You have the formation of the Asiatic Society near about in 1804 or 1806. I have to just check my dates, but it's so old, where they have the foundation of Indological studies because they wanted to know the psychology of this particular country which they wanted to rule. Coming to Strauss, Madam will surely discuss, so I won't encroach upon that particular topic. But Strauss focused on the mythology of a character called, for him he was the hero, and that is Asdivall. And in that particular story, so this is actually my inspiration to discuss Shunashek with you. So in that story of Asdivall, you can analyze the myth based on different ideas. He spoke about, he said that the story should be thought of on a superficial level. There are different undercurrents in that particular story, and unveiling those undercurrents will help you to understand the mythology which is there behind it. So therefore he said that details are there in the form of concealing deeper schemata. So there is something deeper into it which we need to understand. And so if you remember, I did a small exercise with you in my class when I told you the story of the origin of the Shukla Yajurveda. You remember? So you have the story of those birds, and those birds eating up the whale, and then ultimately I said that what does this story try to tell us? And it has concealed one historical truth that one Veda is later and one Veda is earlier, isn't it? So these are the deeper sense meanings which are there, which we need to unveil, which we need to think about in our exercise in our study of mythology. So you can think about the economic structure, you can think about kinship, you can think about matriarchy, patriarchy, you can think about the different concepts of social control which are there. So on the social angle also, mythology plays a very, very, very important role. Another element which I liked about was you have another scholar called Mircea Eliade. Mircea is pronounced as Mircea in Romania. One Romanian student corrected my pronunciation long back. So he's Mircea Eliade. And Mircea Eliade drew heavily from the motifs which are there in Indian mythology. If you read the biographies of the leading theorists, you can really find out how heavily they had depended on Indian mythology, and they honestly accepted that also. The only thing is that we need to read that particular portion. So he said that, spoke on the concept of time, and we always try to test everything on the basis of history, isn't it? And how will you testify a particular account historically, how true it is? It is difficult to testify according to Eliade. It is difficult to testify because for the narrator, the concept of time was different. Time may not be something which is linear. Time may be something which is cyclical. And therefore, we need not have to take that Vishwamitra performed penance for 64,000 years and just merely laugh at the ignorance of our Puranakaras. They may be speaking of a totally different concept of time which is there. And that was well shown in the Bhagavad Gita episode of the Mahabharata, where the idea was Krishna froze time at that point of time. Okay. So it may be so the concept may be different. It is only how we are trying to unlock that and explain it. At the same time, I would say geography may also be different. So it may not be the geography which we understand in the present sense. There may be something called local geography also. As we have the concept of a different concept of time, there may be a different concept of geography. And therefore, we have words like the river Ganga. Godavari is at many times is called Vruddha Ganga, the elder sister of that Ganga. So that is a different concept in itself. So why has this concept come up is a challenge which mythology has put on to us And we have to understand what is the, we cannot say that this concept is wrong. Thought is not wrong. We have to understand the process through which the thought took place. Understood? So, at the same time, the word Kushavarta. Okay? This word Kushavarta, there are many Kushavartas. There is one Kushavarta high up in the north. There is Kushavarta at Trimbakeshwar. There is one Manikarnika Ghat high up in the north. There is one Manikarnika at Trimbakeshwar. So are they referring to different geographies, which may be local geographies also? So to understand mythology, you have to think of temporal constraints, you have to think of spatial references. All these are extremely essential. Then another thing which is he thought of two levels. Mirza Eliade thought of two levels, and that one level was of the sacred and one level was of the profane, of the normal, of the world which is existing. And the sacred functions on the level of myth. The profane is there very much in this world. It is through the ritual acts which we undertake. You try to connect yourself with we are on the profane level. You try to connect the profane with the sacred. This is very well understood through the concept of Naivedya. I purchase one apple from the bazaar, two apples from the bazaar. And one apple I keep it in front of God. And the other apple, I keep it in my fridge. Okay? I eat that apple maybe as soon as I get up. But that apple which is placed in front of God, that I share it with others as something different. Actually, if you see, have the components of both the apples changed? Are they different? They are not different. But that apple became sacred because I connected it with God. And this apple is profane. Okay, so through our acts we try such kind of connections, and then immediately that apple becomes so sacred for us that suppose if it gets spoiled, we don't discard it in the dustbin. We see that it is disposed in some water place or somewhere else, or given to the cow or something which is so it is so sacred to us. Understood? So this is how we are trying to connect the profane world with the sacred. So I am continuously pondering on the question which was asked to me in my first class. Do we have our own way of interpretation? And you spoke about Plato, you spoke about Eliade, you spoke about Barthes, we have spoken about Campbell. We appreciate that they have heavily delved from Indian mythology, from Indian philosophy, from Indian ethos, but can we have our own way of interpretation? And I would say that the purpose of our course will be achieved when we think of our own way of interpretation. And of course, some time back then, Sunil had also thought on this and then sent me a slide of how can we think of our own way of interpretation. So still, I would say that we need to theorize. We can give points. In this way, we can interpret Indian mythology. But still, the theory has to be developed. Right now, I would say it is a kind of a Wendy Doniger style. It is a kind of a toolbox approach. You are using any tool, not just a key, but any tool. to open up the box. But still we should know what should be our tools to open up the box. Maybe our tools may go wrong, isn't it? So we have a tradition of interpreters, which we have lost right now. But in the process of the tradition of our interpreters, they have also used number of ways in interpreting. Because see, language gives you lot of scope to interpret. So we have interpreted language, which is the language which is there in our Vedas, the language which is there in our Puranas, etc., and in our multiple texts as such. Did I ever try to share with you? I might have done this exercise in one of the advanced classes. The famous mantra of the four-horned bull. There is a mantra in the Rigveda which says, I'll just tell you the mantra in the English version of it. Chatavari Shrungaha. That bull has got 4 horns, 3 feet, 2 heads, 7 hands. Okay? And this bull is roaming amongst people and is roaring. Okay? This is language. You are free to interpret. And our scholars have interpreted it in beautiful ways. So, a particular person who follows the ritual order says, 4 horns stand for the 4 priests. 2 heads, they stand for 2 types of sacrifices. 7 hands, they stand for the 7 variants of the sacrifices. And such is the Yajna Purush who is moving around in the people. Is it wrong? No. But still, somebody else can also interpret. So you have the great Patanjali. Some of you might be knowing yoga of Patanjali. And this is Patanjali who has written a very beautiful Mahabhashya on grammar. So he says, 4 horns are your noun, verb, prefix and particles in language. Okay? Then a verb in Sanskrit moves in 2 ways, Parasmaipada and Atmanepada. They are the 2 heads. Interestingly, the 3 feet, see the beauty of interpretation, the 3 feet are the 3 tenses, past, present and future. 7 hands are the 7 cases. You speak about, see, to, by, for, from, of, in. We speak language in this medium. These are and we have 7 cases in Sanskrit. So they are the 7 cases. So this is the Shabda Purush, which is moving around in this world. Okay, logicians may interpret this as Jati, Dravya, Guna and Kriya. Verse 4. Jati is a category. Dravya is an individual. Guna is that which is there in the individual. And the action which is done by that particular individual. So meanings go on, and in this way we have tried to derive meaning or in our own way. This is how we are interpreting. So we are not saying that this bull is a fictitious figure, this bull is something which is nonsense, but we are trying to find out what is this exactly bull signifying. So you have the signified and you have the signifier and the signified, and there is a lot of meaning which is there behind it. Okay? So in the same way.
But how would we know the intentions of what the original words are?
Yeah.
I mean, interpretations are like
Exactly, and therefore I was coming to the same point. So therefore you have express. So you don't have anything which is right or wrong. Since we don't know the intention of the Vakta, you don't know what is right and what is wrong. So you are free, the interpretation becomes beyond the field of the author. Open to debate. And that's why there is, regarding Vedic interpretations, one particular scholar said that the very theory of postmodernism that speaks about that the author is dead is actually applied over here. That since we don't know who is the author, since we don't know who has said this, it is subjected to multiple interpretations. Suppose if you have one Kalidas, see, you don't have the advantage of the existence of the author. So whatever you are doing is a sort of reader's response. Okay. So when I have an author in front of me, I can surely say that, well, this is what is the author would deny. I don't mean this. For example, some years back, when Vinda Karandikar, V.D. Karandikar, the famous Jnanapith awardee, was alive, he had come to the university and we had a poetry recitation program by him. And I would just, when I would hear his poetry, I could really feel that he is trying to put forth the Upanishads. Somebody went and asked him, do you have the Upanishadic influence in you? He denied. So there, if I am interpreting the Upanishads in the light of the works of V.D. Karandikar, it is wrong. But still, I always say that there is a room for the reader to give such a kind of response, because the author may not know what is going on in his subconscious. But many a time such kind of challenge is there. For example, regarding some Jnanapith awardees some years back, our former professor had asked this question that don't you feel that you have drawn a lot from the Indian scene? They refused. Many awardees refused that. They said that we delve heavily into Greek and Western notions of symbolism and aesthetics. That is there. So there it is possible. But in the case of text, especially in mythology, you don't know who is the author. Who has started this particular myth? You don't know the origin. So it becomes a subjective kind of interpretation. Therefore, you can give number of dimensions to it.
Ma'am, I have an observation. When you mentioned that about you interpreted the poet as being influenced by Upanishads, etc. Could it also be that what is the exposure of the interpreter? I mean,
yes,
you are an expert from the, I mean, that's your study, that's your domain. That's why you were able to identify that in something.
Yes, very much.
And I mean, that's also a dimension to it. That
Yes.
I interpret it based on my exposure, my experience.
Yes.
It may differ from the others.
Right.
But there is
Of
no
course.
right or wrong.
Yeah, I take that. You're extremely right. It depends, and therefore maybe my interpretation would be in the light of, since I'm exposed to so and so,
Exactly.
at the same time I'm not exposed to something.
Exactly.
I may not be exposed to typical Western, I would say, terminologies. So I'm not using them right now. So that is one thing which I'm not exposed to. I am exposed to Indian parts of interpretation.
So as a research scholar or as a layperson, we need to make room for this consideration or for this dimension as well when we are interacting with.
And therefore, before accepting something as the truth, we have to accept the existence of multiple truths also at the same time. Yeah, Shashwat.
Thank you, ma'am.
My thing is, while we are talking about interpretation now, is there a danger of over-interpretation?
Yes.
as well?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
I'm seeing
Yes.
a forward of how Hanuman Chalisa is actually a treatise in geography, or Dashavatara is those kind. So this is quick 5-minute interpretations.
Absolutely, and it is so we call it as not exploring, it's exploiting. So that exploitation does take place of some kind of a thought, and therefore people insist on understanding the contextuality. And there the text and the context of the author, if the author is available, and the context of the interpreter, the text which he reads, in the context in which that text is composed, all these factors we have to take into consideration.
So taking from what Shastra said,
Yeah.
the problem happens of interpretation, especially in the Indian context, where mythology has now become part of the religion.
Yeah.
If my interpretation takes the religious flavor, then there is a possibility that I might be missing the actual message.
Of course.
So that's where the problem is, that if somebody absolutely irrational ends up trying to interpret this mythology, then there is a danger. Now, what is the consequence of that danger is something we are seeing under.
We are seeing exactly. Therefore, Therefore, sadly, I would say the way in which we keep on banning books and pulping them. Actually, and therefore I think that it is debate actually which can help us in understanding different layers. What you can accept is your individual way of thinking. Okay, but you should be open to the different ways of interpretation. And what I want to tell is that since I am able to tell you these different ways of interpretation of one particular mantra, it means that our tradition gave room to multiple interpretations. So for us, reality was not just single. Okay, in the context of mythology, reality may be many, multiple as such.
So that when we are connecting this with religion, we say that this is God said so. That's full stop. You should not interpret.
Yeah. So no, but regarding Indian mythology, or regarding, I would say, Indian religion, if you see the tradition which is there, in the words of Amartya Sen, I would say that yes, we were argumentative Indians since ancient times, and therefore even now also the argument continues. Yeah, and so it is wrong to say that accept it as gospel truth. You can think of there may be some other systems of thought which give no room for interpretation and say that if this is said in the text as it is, you have to accept it. No, my religion permits me to accept it in a different way. Therefore, you have number of interpretations which are there, and these interpretations, I would say, have not only been done by our thinkers, ancient thinkers. I say that even our modern the modern social reformers, while reforming Hinduism, also derived sources from Vedic texts and showed how they can be interpreted to stop certain practices which are there in the society. Yeah. So can I proceed? Yes. Yeah. Then you have, so one example which I thought was that of the Purusha Sukta, where you can think of that Purusha Sukta can be interpreted in so many ways which are, and it is still it should be G, but it can go on to Z and it can just continue. So you have so these are the different schools of interpretations which have been done in the Indian way. And unfortunately, we don't know much about these schools. So, for example, see, the historical way of interpretation has also been done in 4th century BC by Mr. Shaunak. Afterward, he has done that. Yaska has tried the etymological way in 7th century BC. That the Puranas have given their own historical perspective. Philosophers have thought of, and we have a huge and long tradition of philosophers who would discuss the different stories, the different concepts, the different symbols and motifs which are occurring in mythology. But also, I would say that the ritualists have succeeded, not fully but partially, in continuing our connection with our mythology. Say for example, the great Purusha Sukta which you have learned in your class regarding creation is used even today in our puja. The 16 aspects of our puja are based on, I won't say literally as such, but the 16 steps of puja and the 16 mantras of Purusha Sukta, this they go hand in hand. Okay, and then once I went up to that, understand, I somehow felt that, see, we have the 16 samskaras. Okay, standard wise it is said, there are 40 or more than that. See, the last mantra of the Purusha Sukta says, Yajnena yajnam ayajanta devaha. So, with the sacrifice. I sacrifice with the sacrifice. Translation. Mere translation. So, the sacrificer, the sacrificed, the sacrificial offering and the sacrifice itself, they become one. The last ritual, according to Hinduism, is Antyeshti, where the sacrificer, the person, becomes the offering and the ritual which is there. Isn't it? So this is how actually the tradition is thought about. These are the intricacies which are there. And this is how you can interpret it in, this is an interpretation, I am not saying this is truth or correct, but this is a possibility that maybe we have thought about it in this particular manner. So you have mythologists, as I said, these are the traditions, and the Indian mythology you can see Max Muller and Oldenburg, those olden European Indologists, the American Indologists, you have Keith, many others. He had mentioned about Heinrich Zimmer, who was also another mythologist. So they have thought about Indian mythology, but if you follow the theory of Orientalism by Edward Said, some of you may be knowing this theory, that who is the best person to interpret mythology? The person who inherits that culture can interpret his own culture in a better way than somebody else. So you have the insider and the outsider. Many times you can see that outsider merges with the insider and the insiders accept such outsiders. It happens so. But still, that advantage is always there on the insider. And that advantage you can see, the advantages point you can see is in the writings of Dr. Ezri Range, who wrote number of books on Indian mythology, tried to unveil certain hints, certain mantras, certain stories which are there in our texts, which some other scholars felt that it is not possible to interpret, they are bizarre, they are fictitious, we can get some fanciful explanation. So he succeeded because he was deeply rooted. That is the reason. And the point which he could gain was that he knew the Western theories thoroughly. So he had the knowledge, the critical thinking which was there from the West, was well groomed in these steps which I had, these aspects which I have told you, and then he proposed his own theories, which you will be learning in the class. Now coming to my favorite Shunashri. The story occurs in the Aitareya Brahman, and the context of the story is there in the end, where it is said that, and the Rajasuya sacrifice, the story is to be read out. Now recited or narrated, which actually helps in retaining that story down the ages. Okay, so you can get the earliest record of the story because it has been recited in so many Rajasuyas for so many years, and then it was penned down in the manuscripts which we get right now. Now see what is the story trying to tell us. you have a king and yeah, you have the king who is Harishchandra. Some of you might be knowing Harishchandra through this Raja Harishchandra Tea Factory, the Marathi movie or based on the life sketch of Balasaheb Phalke, or maybe by reading this Harishchandra Taramati story somewhere in Amar Chitrakatha. That is where our mythology has been narrated. So you have this Harishchandra Tea Factory and Harishchandra over here, but you have a different dimension of this first Harishchandra right now, who was Aputra. See the I'll follow the Sanskrit version, you follow the English one. Okay? So he was Aputra. Now we have to keep in mind that, see now in which angle are we reading? You can point out. It does not mean that he was Niputra. Niputra and Aputra are different. Now, see the play of language. Niputra will tell you that didn't have any child. Aputra tells you an absence of the putra, which means possibility of putris. But putris are not mentioned. As such, even I will tell you, if you go to Trambakeshwar to find your genealogy, you will get a list of number of people, only sons are recorded. Daughters are not recorded. Yeah. So
Very short.
most of the time, because there is one work which has been done on genealogy by the economics and the history department. So there, and even I have referred to the Kulavruttanta of my family. There also the question which I had asked was, which means that there was no girl child. There was so many centuries. The birth of the girl is not recorded. Or it is said they had children, that's it.
If not for DKDM, even I didn't know that Shiva and Parvati had a daughter by name Ashok Surya.
Yeah.
So the practice started by the gods.
Yeah. See.
Just
See, I'll tell you, this is the feminist angle, the feminist reading. So when we are reading the undercurrents which are there and how undercurrents are played through language. So I showed you the difference between Aputra and Putra, and at the same time he is saying that he had Jaya. Now the word Jaya is specifically used. Jaya means a woman becomes Jaya when she gives birth. Okay? So this is one point. So this is the feminist angle. But there is a limit where you can stop. Okay? I remember your class. Where he was he had Daniels. And Daniel was a passive onlooker. And at times what he would speak would be in the form of commas. Yeah. And so there were two sages who approached him. And they explained him the need and necessity of a male child. And then you have a long story of 10 verses of Putra Mahima, the greatness of being bestowed, conferred upon son. And when I would do this kind of a reading in the class, some of my students would say that, see ma'am, I have only 2 girls, I don't have a boy. So such type of reactions we would get in the class. Anyway, so you can read the Putra Mahima, I am leaving it to you, but see this particular story can be read through the feminist angle. This is a dimension which is there. That is what I want to tell you. Now he approached a particular god and to Varun. And when he approached Varun, he said that he promised that if I get a son, I will offer him to you. So, is it not the practice nowadays? It is phasing out. But in certain temples, especially in Maharashtra and down south, I don't know what north, where you have the Devdasi tradition, where you have the Vaghya Runi tradition, your entire Zogwa movie, where you have the Zogta and Zogtini traditions, where children are offered to God. Okay.
First
one street. And even, okay. So still there is a, even I think somewhere in Christianity also the nuns, one used to go in the monasteries. So that is there, so that tradition is there. Now see what happens. When the son is born, Varun asks, I follow your promise. And see, he starts giving number of reasons and starts evading it. Right? So he says that it's in page number 517, concluding paragraphs, where he says, go and beg to Varun and sacrifice to him. See, there is a possibility. People believe, we normally deny, but sacrifice that child to him. And he keeps on saying this, and give that child to me, and Varun keeps on, Harishchandra keeps on evading that. He names the child Rohit. Maybe for some other interpretation this word will be important, some other style. See, I remember one fairy tale, Rumpelstiltskin, if you remember that.
Yes.
Where there is a tiny elf who agrees to help the miller's daughter and takes a promise that when you will become the queen, you should give the twins to me. And then the miller's daughter refuses. And then there is a challenge which is put that find out my name. So I won't say that the complete story is similar, but you can find one motive, that offering the child to somebody else is seen not only in the Indian scenario, you can see it in the fairy tales which are there in the West also. So there are a number of reasons which are there, and since he has not kept the promise, he is suffering now. Harishchandra starts suffering. Is it not very similar to certain problems and issues which we face, to which we don't get any proper answer, and then some elderly person says, it is something that you promised to God, where the G is small.